Before we begin, since this is a BBC-owned property, I feel the need to point out that the news arm of the BBC has a continuing issue with transphobic leanings in its news coverage. You can find in a pinned comment below various videos from both myself and other YouTubers covering this issue. And while I understand that the Doctor Who creative team is not responsible for this, I will continue to point this out for as long as it remains a consistent issue. Thank you.
Is anybody else getting a weird feeling of deja vu right now? So, word is, at time of recording, I've seen it reported as rumor, I've seen it confirmed. I'm going to talk about it and roll the dice that it does not get completely debunked between now and when I intend to put this video up, which is not immediately when I shoot it or the news drops, because I'm trying to dial back my work schedule so I can get other stuff done that is behind, but that's my issues. Anyways, word is that during Russell T Davies' new run on Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor, that Steven Moffat is being brought in to write a story. So this has garnered a very mixed reaction, and in fact, kind of runs the gamut. I've seen people get very excited by this. I've seen people get very nervous about this. I've seen people get confused as to why people would get nervous. And as someone who kind of honestly sees both sides of this, maybe I can lay out the whole thing. First of all, let's just be open about the fact some people don't like Moffat's work, or at least they didn't like where Moffat's work ended up. His work initially on Doctor Who was nearly universally acclaimed. I mean, look at the run he had when he first started under the period when Russell T Davies was running the show. The Empty Child, The Girl in the Fireplace, Blink, Forest of the Dead. That was pretty unimpeachable. It's a big part of why people were excited for him to take over. Now, people did get tired of him, but for the most part, that was when he was running things. So while during his time as showrunner, he did do some of my favorite stories, he show ran for my favorite Doctor, he also did stuff like Hellbent. So, mixed bag. Even someone who liked his era, I acknowledge, mixed bag. But the thing is, it feels more appropriate to compare this to when he was writing, when RTD was running things, because that's what the situation would be again. So whatever you feel about where his writing ended up when he was showrunner, and he was also doing multiple things at the same time for some of those series, this is going to be much more akin to when he did what most people agree was some of his best stuff and consistently really, really good. So that's the reason to be excited. What are the reasons to be nervous? Well, for me, since I do for the most part like Moffat's writing, especially on Doctor Who, it's mostly philosophical. Because a big part of why I am allowing myself to get excited about RTD2 and the Ncuti Gatwa era is that I've gone in assuming, and I need to assume this, I've gone in assuming that he's not just going to come in and do what he did back in 2006 or 5 or whenever the heck the reboot started. That he's not just going to bring back that feel and try and recreate what the show was over a decade ago. I am assuming that, and I need that to be true. Because if he is, in fact, trying to just recreate what it was before, I suddenly have much, much less interest, despite liking a lot of his era. I always get worried about the show, well, any show, but especially Doctor Who, when it feels like it's reaching backwards instead of trying to move forward. Now, there is an inherent fear that I have around that with RTD coming back at all, as well as the reuse of David Tennant, but I've been willing to roll with that and be cautiously optimistic on a lot of things that are like just barely fitting in a situation that kind of works for me. The case of Tenet coming back, it's a limited run, it's 3 specials, and he's done. Great. Great. I am kind of curious as to what the story will be, and he's not going to stick around indefinitely. Okay. Let's see what you can do with that. As for RDT, he's grown as a writer. It's been a long time since he wrote Doctor Who. I mean, like, for anything other than like some internet exclusive stuff. He's changed as an artist. He's grown. I think he's gotten better in a lot of ways as a writer. I want to see what RTD now will do with the material. I know what he did with it back then. I don't need more of that. But there's an increasing number of things that don't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be him trying to recapture what it used to be, but still feel like caution signs to me. One was us finding out that they're already working on spinoffs, which from a business perspective, I get. I did a whole video talking about all this. But in short, that feels like, again, trying to recapture the glory days of Doctor Who and its spinoff and its universe of things, most of which was under RTD. And I'm nervous at the idea of jumping back into that right away, partially because it feels like chasing old glory, and partially because I really want them to just focus on getting the main show as good as it can be. And now they're also bringing in a writer who was also working with RTD during that era. A good writer, don't get me wrong, but it's another thing that feels like it might, not definitely, not definitively, but it might be signaling more interest in recapturing old stuff than trying to do new stuff. And then you add in even the temporary return of David Tennant on top of that. More and more things are adding up and feel like they are pointing towards, we're going to make it like it was, which I understand will get a lot of people excited. But for the health of the property, I don't think that's a good idea. I almost never think that's a good idea. I will pretty much always advocate attempting to move forward as opposed to trying to grasp and capture something that you've lost. Now, it can, on occasion, work. I still don't think it's the healthiest for the sake of the property. I don't think it's the creative, most healthy thing to be doing and approaching with a mentality, but like, it's not impossible to work. It's just it's a mentality that I'm very, very, very wary of. And I just would have kind of liked RTD to be the shepherd to watch over and bring in some new people, some new ideas. And maybe we will still get some people who are new, but bringing in the other biggest name who was also writing at that time for the show. And like, I get it. I get why some people would take a lot of comfort in this, especially given what happened during Chibnall's era, especially Series 11, which was that he brought in a writing team which was pretty much all people who either didn't have experience in writing science fiction or didn't have experience in writing television or didn't have experience in either one. And while in a couple of instances it did result in some newer, fresher ideas, one of the other practical outcomes of that was that it resulted in Chibnall not spending much time on his own scripts because he had to work on fixing up the scripts that he was given to make them shooting ready because they were written by people who couldn't just produce something that was going to be workable as a finished script. I mean, this is part of why the Battle of Renskorev Kolos ended up the way that it did, and they effectively shot a first draft because he was too busy cleaning up everyone else's scripts to finish his own. But that was not a problem with the idea of bringing in newer people with new ideas. That was a problem with the execution of how he did it and the specific lineup of people that he did. Any one of whom might have been a great addition, but the collective weight of their inexperience in either this medium or genre meant that Chibnall couldn't work on his own freaking stuff. So it's one of those cases where I don't think it was a bad idea to bring in newer people, just as a broad thing. Maybe that specific group. Just again, not saying they were bad writers, but like when the showrunner has to babysit all of them because they're not used to working on a product like this, and he also has to produce his own scripts, that was just a bad idea. Or that was a bad execution of a potentially good core idea of bringing in newer people with new notions. So the idea of now bringing back Moffat feels like running away from that. And that may not be the case. It may turn out that Moffat is really the only notable returning name that we're bringing in, and then it's a bunch of other new people, or maybe Davies is planning to write more of the scripts himself than he had previously. Who knows? If we start getting announcements for other regular writers like Toby Woodhouse or Mark Gatiss also coming back, then I am going to genuinely be nervous, and I'm going to start getting paranoid. And while we're not there yet, this feels like one more thing that has the potential to signal an era that I'm going to get very frustrated by and disappointed by. It may not be bad in any objective measure, but as someone where part of my love of Doctor Who stems not from the fact that I grew up on it as a kid, I didn't. I discovered it in my 20s. And part of the reason I fell in love with it was because of the breadth of possibility. The fact that it could go anywhere, any when, tell any story, have any possible future direction. And sometimes, yeah, those directions went places that didn't work. But the near infinite possibility of Doctor Who is a big part of what I love about it. And seeing more and more and more signals that they're going to try and just recapture the old glory, that's not moving forward into infinite possibilities. That's doing what Star Trek did for decades. Do you know how long Star Trek went without moving its own timeline forward? Do you know how long Voyager was the furthest into the future that franchise went because they decided to go with prequels and reboots and refused to go forward in any way? Now, whatever you think of things like Picard that have brought things further forward, and also capitulating the fact that some of the retread or prequel stuff, such as, say, Strange New Worlds, is really good, but that was a really long period where it felt like this is the embodiment of spinning your wheels because you don't know where to go. That was also the period in which I had the least interest in anything Star Trek was doing. I've got more interest in it now, and honestly, if something like Picard didn't exist, I might not be as into Strange New Worlds as I am. It helps that I know somewhere the franchise is trying to move forward. Even if my pin just fell off. Ugh. I'll find it later. But, even if things are circling back, as long as some part of it is trying to go forward to explore the possibilities of not looking back, but looking ahead in some way, whether it be by literally finally moving the timeline forward with Picard or exploring different genres with things like Lower Decks, that gives me reassurance that I can enjoy something that is a little bit more of a throwback, like Strange New Worlds, because I know that's not the only thing the thing's doing. And maybe with the spin-offs with the other things, Doctor Who will create a situation where some of it moves forward, some of it looks back. And maybe it'll work. Granted, not all of this is happening at once. As I said, Tennant's on a limited run. He's not staying around forever. We'll have Ncuti Gatwa. Maybe he'll bring such a different energy on the part that it'll help carry things and have them feel new regardless of the state of the actual scripts being written. Maybe. And maybe the scripts, even from old hands like RTD and Moffat, will still feel new and fresh. But it's getting to a point where it's starting to feel like putting on blinders to just assume that's going to be the case. The people being announced, the people involved are very good, have been very good. And yet I am still nervous. We'll see. I don't know, and we'll see. What are your thoughts about any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Any amount you can throw me that way is of great assistance. Plus, you get perks at every tier, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is whether you're excited, whether you're nervous, whether anything about what's coming up, you are beautiful, You are valid. You are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meeting, and until next time, this council is adjourned. I also put the ring on the wrong finger. I normally do it on the left. I'm just a mess today. This video wouldn't have been possible without my supporters over on Patreon, and I would especially like to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Imudelki, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Barnaby Lacks the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Tim Price, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, General Contact Unit Problem Child, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thank you so much.